The Magi are some of the most mysterious figures in the Bible. After Jesus is born, they appear out of nowhere with lavish gifts to worship him, then disappear as quickly as they came. We know they came from the east, but where exactly was their home? And what does their origin tell us about Jesus? The first Magi were the Magos, a Zoroastrian priestly caste in ancient Media who advised the king. But by the 1st century, Magi had spread far beyond Media, and the term had come to mean any learned men who specialized in astrology and the interpretation of dreams. So contrary to popular belief, the Magi in the Bible weren't kings, but astrologers and dream interpreters. But where did these Magi come from? There are 3 main candidates for the Magi's homeland. The first possibility is China. An early Christian text claims that the Magi came from a far eastern country called Shur, at the shore of the Great Ocean. Many scholars believe that Shur was an ancient name for China, and therefore the Great Ocean could be the Pacific. This text, called the Revelation of the Magi, was written just a few centuries after Christ, and was one of the first Christian works dedicated primarily to the story of the Magi. Furthermore, ancient Chinese records tell us that astrologers of the Han Dynasty witnessed an unusual comet in the early spring of 5 BC, which fits perfectly with a timeline of Jesus' birth. The Han astrologers described the comet as a Sui Sing. According to Han astrology, Sui were the means of eliminating the old and inaugurating the new. Their appearance was a sign of change, and comets that appeared for a long time indicated very important change. What's more, by the 1st century, the Silk Road was humming along. Merchants brought Chinese silks to the west, and Roman glass back east. So is it really that hard to believe that, perhaps convinced by a shocking astrological sign, some Chinese astrologers might have traveled to Jerusalem? Unfortunately, the evidence against the Chinese Magi view is far too strong. First, besides the revelation of the Magi, no other ancient text suggests that the Magi came from China. And even in the revelation of the Magi, the country named Shur seems more like an imagined faraway land than an actual geographic place. Second, even though the word Magi was widely used in the 1st century, it was never connected with China, while it was connected with many other locations much closer to Judea. Third, when we hear the East, we might think of China, but for 1st century Jews, the East meant the modern Near East, lands such as Syria, Arabia, or Babylon. Finally, while luxury goods did travel between China and the Roman world in the 1st century, there is zero evidence that any people were actually making the same journey, a journey that would have taken almost a year to complete. Starting in the ancient Han capital of Chang'an, this multinational trade route spanned more than 4,000 miles across the continent of Asia, passing through dozens of climates and nations. The few goods that actually traveled this road did so through many merchant hands. So we can safely conclude that the Magi did not come from China. But the same cannot so easily be said of the next candidate for the Magi's homeland, Arabia. The Bible says that the Magi, upon seeing Jesus, opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. All of these gifts point strongly to Arabia. Jews had long associated gold with Sheba, a southern Arabian kingdom in modern-day Yemen, and frankincense and myrrh were resins tapped from trees that grew almost exclusively in southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. Indeed, in the 1st century, the frankincense and myrrh trade between southern Arabia and the Mediterranean was dominated by the northern Arabian kingdom of Nabatea, with its capital of Petra. Nabatea at this time was very wealthy, which aligns with the Bible's description of the Magi as extremely wealthy men. The idea of Arabian Magi is also supported by biblical prophecy. The prophet Isaiah spoke of a day when 5 Arabian people groups would come with gold and frankincense to bow before Israel's God. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news, the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. The rams of Nabaioth shall minister to you. On top of this prophecy, Psalm 72 speaks of Sheba's king bringing gold to a Jewish royal son, and the Old Testament books of Job, Judges, and Jeremiah all refer to Arab tribes as people from the east, very similar to the way Matthew describes the Magi. This is likely why one of the earliest Christian writers, Justin Martyr, claimed that the Magi were from Arabia. And we know this claim is historically plausible because Pliny the Elder, a 1st century Roman writer, confirmed that Arabia was home to Magi. Finally, the proximity of Arabia to Judea is also a very strong point in its favor. As much as we might like to imagine the Magi trekking thousands of miles to get to Jesus, the reality is that travel in the ancient world was difficult, expensive, and dangerous. So compared to other, more distant options, Arabia is a much more reasonable place to imagine someone traveling from to get to Judea. But the Arabian theory is not without drawbacks. First, just because the Magi gave gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh doesn't mean they came from the place where those gifts originated. These luxury goods flowed through many trade networks and could have been procured by wealthy people of other lands. The fact that the gifts were from Arabia doesn't mean their givers were Arabian. Also, gold was mined all over the ancient world and was certainly not confined to just Arabia. Second, although the Old Testament sometimes refers to Arabians as people from the east, it also used this phrase for other regions like Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. For example, the foreign prophet Balaam from Mesopotamia was said to be from the east, while Isaiah calls Cyrus of Persia a deliverer from the east. So we can't be sure that Matthew is referring to Arabia when he says the Magi are from the east. Third, although there were Magi in many places in the 1st century, the word Magi was still most strongly associated with Persia and Babylonia, not Arabia. Matthew could have used another Greek word like astrologer or wise men, but he instead chose Magi. In fact, the classic ancient centers of mathematical astronomy and astrology were in Persia and Babylonia, not Arabia. Given that the Magi in the Bible appear to have sophisticated star-reading capabilities and rely heavily on astrological signs, it seems more likely that they came from one of these centers. So the proposal of Arabian Magi is far from certain. But that might not be true for the final candidate, Parthia, which in many ways is the most natural home for the Magi. In the 1st century BC, Parthia was the only world power capable of challenging Rome. The Parthian Empire was massive, stretching from Syria to modern-day Pakistan, and at its heart were the regions of Babylonia, Media, and Persia, which were all strongly tied to Magi. The original Magi were a Zoroastrian priestly caste in ancient Media. When the Persian Empire expanded, it absorbed these priests into the Persian royal court. Indeed, the word Magi itself comes from the Old Persian word magus. Persian Magi placed high value on astrology for understanding world events. They believed that cosmic signs manifested spiritual realities. But by the 1st century, Magi had spread to Babylonia, the home of astrology in the ancient world. Magi first came when Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BC. Then, 200 years later, right before Alexander the Great conquered the kingdom of Persia, local Magi in Babylon predicted his victory in battle by studying astrological signs, and they welcomed him into the city with gifts and incense. So we know that by the 1st century, there was a precedent of Persian Magi in Babylonia using astrological signs to predict the arrival of a new king. What's even more fascinating is that a Babylonian tablet commentary from a few centuries before Jesus' birth predicted that a king of the world would rise when a certain star followed the moon, and that this king would not grow old. So it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that in the 1st century, local Magi might have witnessed such an event, described by Matthew as a star in the east, and traveled in search of that new king. Moreover, the fact that the Magi knew to go to Judea points to a Babylonian origin. 6 centuries earlier, the Jewish people had been forcibly relocated to Babylonia, and many Jews never returned, but were still living there in the 1st century. Indeed, the Old Testament says that the Jewish prophet Daniel was in contact with Magi at the Babylonian royal court. And while in Babylon, Daniel had prophesied that the Jewish Messiah would come after a period of 483 years. By the 1st century, the end of this period was fast approaching. So it's plausible that Magi in Babylonia, inspired by Daniel's prophecy, connected the star they witnessed not just with any king, but with a Jewish king. It's also crucial to realize that the Magi in the Bible appear to have the backing of a powerful nation. They undertake a long and dangerous journey in search of a newborn king. They carry expensive treasures to be given as tribute, and they obtain an audience with King Herod the Great when they arrive in Jerusalem. These aren't just curious astrologers, but dignitaries of a foreign land. This makes good sense of what happened when the Magi showed up in Jerusalem asking about a new king. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Less than 4 decades earlier, in 40 BC, the Parthians had invaded Judea and set up a puppet king named Antigonus, who expelled Herod from Judea. Herod later returned with Roman support, helping to execute the Parthian-backed king, and was installed as king in his place. So, if the Parthians were returning in the form of Magi, searching for a new Jewish king, it makes sense that Herod and his capital, Jerusalem, were greatly troubled. The writings of early Christians also bear witness to Parthian Magi. In the first few centuries of the church, Christians who wrote about the Magi, including Clement of Alexandria, John Chrysostom, and Prudentius, usually described them as Persian, which means they would have come from somewhere in Parthia. But which city in Parthia did the Magi come from? In the first century, Parthia was centered on 2 locations, Ctesiphon and Ecbatana. Ecbatana was an ancient city that had previously served as a capital for the Median and Persian empires. It was located in the cool highlands of the Median Plateau and was home to the Parthian royal court during the summer months when the heat at lower elevations became sweltering. But for the rest of the year, the Parthian court was based at the great metropolis of Ctesiphon. Ctesiphon in the 1st century was a major center of power and one of the most populated cities in the world. Located on the Tigris River just south of modern-day Baghdad, it was closely connected with its twin city of Seleucia across the river and boasted more than 100,000 residents. If the Magi were sponsored by the Parthian king, then they most likely came from his royal court. Depending on the time of year, that court would have been based at either Ecbatana or, more likely, Ctesiphon. Not only was Ctesiphon the normal home of Parthian authority, it also lay at the heart of major trade arteries like the Silk Road and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and therefore had access to all sorts of luxury goods, including gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And gold was also mined elsewhere in the Parthian Empire, so it's not a stretch to imagine Parthian Magi bringing these gifts to Jesus. Since Parthia lies directly east from Judea, it seems to fit the phrase, "from the east," used by Matthew. Though it was far away, about 600 miles, it was connected by a well-traveled caravan route along the Fertile Crescent. This caravan route bypassed the ominous Syrian desert, which lay directly in between Judea and Parthia. The Syrian desert is a vast wasteland that was feared by ancient travelers. Almost completely devoid of water or human life, it was known for its dangerous sandstorms and armed bandits. Although traveling straight through it might have been much shorter, travelers almost always went around instead. So the road from Ctesiphon to Jerusalem first went northwest, then south. Setting out from Ctesiphon, the Magi would have crossed the Great Euphrates, then trekked northwest along its banks past the river fortress of Dura Europus, before turning south at Nicapharion. As they skirted the edge of the Syrian desert, they would have found refuge in the oasis town of Tadmor, before traveling on to Damascus, then onto the Jordan River Valley, and finally the steep ascent from Jericho to Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, they went on to Bethlehem. The faith and wonder of the Magi should inspire us all. When the King of the Jews, God's chosen Savior, was born, his own did not receive him. But God communicated with these foreigners in the language they understood, the language of the stars. And with the little information they had, they came from the ends of the earth, risking their lives and fortunes just to bow at Jesus' feet and pay him tribute. So it may not have been a mistake after all for Matthew to leave out the Magi's homeland. In a way, they represent all the nations, the first sign that this newborn child came not just for those near, but also for those far away, in the most distant of places, that all who call on the name of the Lord might be saved.